Have you ever felt like your world is falling apart? Have you ever been caught in an ugly situation before, an ugly circumstance? Maybe you're here today and you're the only one that knows it, but you're suffering in silence. Maybe you're here today and you feel rejected or you feel abandoned or maybe you just feel like you're on the outs. Is there a part of you that when you call out to God and you hear no answer, you think to yourself, where is God? Today, if that's you and you feel like you're hurting on the inside, you feel like your soul is aching, I want to invite you to journey with me, because today, through the book of Daniel, through the story of Daniel in the Bible, we are going to discover the answer to this profound question. How should a follower of Christ respond in moments in life when things seem out of control? How does a follower of Christ respond in those moments when things seem out of control? Today we're going to learn 3 reasons why to put our trust and our hope in a God who loves you. Maybe you're here today and a friend invited you. Maybe you're here today and you're new to Broadway Church. I am so glad you've joined us. Please be our guest. Just tune in the best you can to what we're going to talk about over the next 25 minutes, because I truly believe that the next 25 minutes could radically change your life. Amen? This section is with me. Amen? Oh, thank you, church. I love it. Travel back with me to the year 605 BC. 605 BC, we'll be traveling to the city of ancient Babylon. Now, Babylon was about 50 miles away from where modern day Baghdad is in Iraq. Now, the story of Daniel, we're going to meet Daniel and his friends in just a moment, but the story of Daniel starts off with a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, and he was an evil king. He was a wicked king, and he was all about his own glory, his own splendor. He would conquer nations with ease and with arrogance. He would let nothing and no one stand in his way. You know, some people, they have like a bottle cap collection or a baseball card collection. I collected hockey cards as a kid. Okay, whoop, whoop. Go Canadian childhood. Anyway, King Nebuchadnezzar, he started a king's collection and a god's collection. He would go and conquer another nation, and instead of murdering that king and setting that place on fire, what he would do is he would actually kidnap that king, bring him back to Babylon, and he would actually start his own king's collection as a way of showing his dominance over the other nations. And he did the same thing with the idols from the temple. So he would go into that nation's temple, and whatever god they worshiped, he would go and rob that idol from the temple, bring it back to Babylon. He started a god's collection as a way to say all other gods are inferior to our main Babylonian god, Marduk. King Nebuchadnezzar was a wicked man, but something would happen in his life that would radically alter his reign. So let's pick it up in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some articles from the temple of God. So Judah, this is modern day Israel. This is where God's chosen people lived, and it was besieged by Nebuchadnezzar. So along with some articles from the temple, Nebuchadnezzar took along with him some members of the royal family and some of the nobility. And 4 of these young men that were taken from Judah to Babylon were 4 guys named Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, having your nation besieged by another nation was no small matter. These guys, they saw their friends and their family murdered right before their very eyes. Everyone they'd ever known was killed. They were kidnapped and taken from their homes in Judah and forced to march 500 miles to Babylon. Now, do you have any idea how far 500 miles is? That's from Vancouver to Calgary. Can you imagine being beaten and shackled and whipped and then forced to walk from Vancouver to Calgary with no shoes on? Okay, it's craziness. The first thing that Nebuchadnezzar does to these guys when they bring them back to Babylon is he changes their names. And he starts to train them to be servants in the king's palace. So you might know Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah better by their Babylonian names. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah. So they changed their names as a way of trying to like brainwash them from their faith in God and try to assimilate them into the Babylonian culture. They were forced to study the occult and astrology, and they were forced to eat food that had been sacrificed to idols. Now that was a big deal for these Jewish guys. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had it bad. Like it was terribly, terribly bad. It seemed in their life at this point that everything was coming unglued for them. Yet they held unswervingly to the hope that they had in God. And it's here where we find the very first reason to trust in God when it seems that your world is falling apart. As your outline says, number one, God is in control of your personal circumstances. God is in control of your personal circumstances. You see, these guys, they went from nobility to nobodies in a matter of moments. They could have stepped back and asked, where is this God that's so supposedly in control when things are so out of control? Because things had never been more out of control for these guys than they were at that very moment. But they understood that God was in control of their personal circumstances. They understood, as your outline says, there are eternal reasons for your temporary trials. There are eternal reasons for your temporary trials. You see, God was and is and had been at work in their story for many years. God was moving them along to their ultimate good. God was moving them along to their ultimate good. The reason they were being persecuted wasn't for their immediate good, it was for their ultimate good. You see, God had told the nation of Israel, follow me and I will bless you. Reject me and I will give you to your enemies. And the nation of Israel was not following God, so God was following through on his consequences. I'm in the early stage of parenting myself. I have 3 young kids under the age of 6 at home. So discipline is like the main tool in my tool belt when it comes to my parenting style right now. And if you have young kids or you know anything about discipline, follow through is an absolute must. The other night, Pax was eating dinner, and it had taken him over an hour to get to this point in his bowl, okay? He hadn't eaten that much. He kept getting distracted, running away from the table, going to play. So finally, our family was planning to go swimming after dinner. So I sit Pax down on his chair, and I say, Pax, I love you so much, buddy. But if you don't eat what's in your bowl and you keep getting up from the table, our whole family is going to go swimming without you. Harper will go swimming, Sawyer will go swimming, and you will stay home. I told him, I said, hey, Pax, I don't care if there's an earthquake. If your bum leaves this seat, you're not going swimming. I'm fuming at this point in a very parental type of way. And I don't know if this makes me a horrible parent. I'm pretty sure it does. But I was hoping so bad that he was going to get off his chair. I was hoping so bad he wouldn't finish his meal so I could show him the wrath of Simon. I could show him the hand of justice. I was like, I wanted this to be a learning opportunity, a natural consequence. I wanted this to be like a, dude, you knew and you disobeyed. You need to learn that eating your meal is important. You need to learn that daddy is in charge. And I wanted him to learn this lesson so badly. Pax is honestly such a good kid. He like licks his bowl clean, puts his bathing suit on, and I'm in the car waiting for you, Dad. Like he's such a good kid. See, God was doing with the nation of Israel what I was trying to do with Pax. The Bible tells us that the Lord disciplines the ones he loves. In Hebrews 12, it says, the child that he loves, he disciplines. The child he embraces, he also corrects. See, Israel were his chosen people. He wanted to bless them, but time and time again, they refused to listen to God. They refused to obey him. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of their enemies, not for their immediate good, but for their ultimate good. Perhaps you're here today, and you've lost sight that God is in control of your personal circumstances. And no matter how hard it gets, today I want you to focus in on, laser beam focus in on, God is working all things together for your good. God is working all things together for your good. Now this doesn't mean that all things are good. Clearly bad things happen, but listen to what Romans chapter 8 says. It says, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. So clearly bad things still happen, but God works all things together for good. God is in control of your personal circumstances, and there are eternal reasons for your temporary trials. Listen how the Apostle Paul puts it. The Apostle Paul was going through a very rough time himself. He was coming unglued. His world was falling apart, and he wrote these words, Therefore we do not lose hope. Though outwardly we may be wasting away, but inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, let's fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Maybe you're here today and you feel like you are just crumbling under the pressure and trials of this world. Hear me when I say this. Take courage. Do not lose heart. Remember that God is in control of your personal circumstances. Okay, back to the story of Daniel. So even though they're surrounded by a culture that mocked their God, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, they were determined to live as heaven rules. They were determined to believe and live in such a way like God actually was in charge no matter what. So by doing this, they earned favor with God. God actually gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams. And not only did they earn favor with God, they earned favor with King Nebuchadnezzar. See, King Nebuchadnezzar, he noticed that they were 10 times wiser than all of the other magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. And so they were promoted to be administrators over the province of Babylon. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar, however, he did not share their love and devotion for God. In fact, he set up a statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. It was made of gold. And he declared that when the music played, all people of every nation must bow down and worship the image of gold that he set up. And if they refused, they'd be thrown into the fiery furnace. Yeah. And everyone went, oh, yeah, okay, this is a big deal. Like, you don't want to be thrown into the fiery furnace, the blazing furnace. So, we don't know where Daniel is at this time, but we know that when the music played, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow down, and they would not worship the image of gold that was set up. You see, everyone else was bowing down. Everyone else was worshiping the idol. Everyone else was going along with the flow. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to worship anyone or anything but God. What about you? As you sit here today, is there an area in your life where you're just simply going along with the flow? Is there an area of your life where you know that God wouldn't approve of, but you're doing it because everyone else is doing it? Hearing that they wouldn't bow down, Nebuchadnezzar started to burn with rage. In Daniel 3, it tells us, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men are brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar says to them, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I've set up? He says, I'm gonna give you one more chance, you guys. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I've made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand, he says. Oh no, you didn't. Did you just challenge the God of the universe, King Nebuchadnezzar? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they replied to the king, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. See, if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from it, your majesty. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you've set up." See, Nebuchadnezzar had heard enough. He immediately threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the blazing furnace. The flames were so hot that it says that the soldiers that actually threw them into the furnace, they died because of the heat. Now, instantly, Nebuchadnezzar jumps to his feet in amazement, and he starts to count the guys inside the fiery furnace. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4. And he says, how many guys did I throw into that furnace? Because I count 4, and one of them looks like one of the sons of God. He calls Nebuchadnezzar, approach the opening of the blazing furnace, and he calls out, he shouted out, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. They were completely unharmed. They didn't even smell like smoke. God did a miracle. And amazingly, King Nebuchadnezzar started to give honor and praise to the God of heaven. And it's here we learn the second reason to trust in God when it seems that your world is falling apart. You see, because God is in control of your personal well-being. God is in control of your personal well-being. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were able to respond confidently with the God that we serve is able to deliver us from it because they understood that God was ultimately in control of their personal well-being. Speaking of God's sovereignty over all things, including our personal well-being, we learn from the book of Job, speaking about God. It says, if it was his intention and he withdrew his spirit and breath from the earth, all humanity would perish together and mankind would return to the dust. You see, God cradles. He cradles the whole world in his hands. And every breath that we breathe has been gifted to us and is sustained by God himself. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they realized this. And Nebuchadnezzar learned a valuable lesson that day as well. As your outline says, no thing can bind us if God intends for us to be free. No thing can bind us if God intends for us to be free. So you're hearing this today. You're hearing that God is in control of your personal circumstances, that God's in control of your personal well-being. And you might be sitting there going, Simon, I want to call shenanigans on that. Because you're sitting here today and you're going, Simon, I don't feel very free. Simon, I don't feel like I'm living a free life at all. I feel like I'm living in a weak and broken down cage that is my body. Maybe you're here today and you are sick. You are hurting. And maybe you're the only one that knows. But you're asking yourself, Simon, if God is in control of my personal well-being, then why am I suffering so much? If God is in control of my personal well-being, then why doesn't he do something about my pain? This is a legitimate question. And the answer is not what you want to hear, but it's a simple response. I don't know why you're hurting. I don't know why your body is breaking down. I don't know why you're having to walk through the fire of suffering that you're having to walk through. But I do know that God is in control of your health. I do know that he does want you to rely on him, and I do know that he will be with you in your pain every step of the way. If this is you, and I'm talking to you right now, like you feel like your body's breaking down in whatever area of your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, you feel like you're losing it. I want to read a passage that God declares to his people. And maybe you're here today and this is the one thing, the one piece of truth that you leave with today. I want you to forget all else around you right now, and it's like the Lord of heaven is speaking this to your soul right now. It's like God actually brought you here for a reason today. Go figure. And it's like he actually wants to speak this over your life right now. Would you hear him? Thus saith the Lord, the King of heaven declares, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I don't know why it is that you're suffering today, but I do know that God is in control of all things, and that includes your personal well-being. Okay, back to the story of Daniel. Years go by, and Nebuchadnezzar has this on-again, off-again relationship with the Most High God. But Nebuchadnezzar forgets that God is sovereign in all things, and he starts to live like God doesn't really exist. And then one night he has a dream. And this dream is about this huge, massive tree that covers almost the whole earth. And then an angel called a messenger comes down and starts cutting down this tree, and this tree begins to fall over. And he wakes up from his dream and he's freaking out. He doesn't know what this dream means. And he remembers, Daniel. Daniel can interpret dreams. So he calls Daniel into his presence and he starts to explain his dream to Daniel. And he says, Daniel, this is this tree and it's gonna fall over, and this messenger cuts it down, and I'm freaking out here. What does it mean? And Daniel goes pale. He goes white like a ghost, and he slowly starts to respond. He says, "O king, if only this dream was about someone else. If only this dream was about your enemies, but it's not. It's about you. This dream means that your kingdom will be cut down. Your kingdom will be taken away from you by God. Your kingdom will be taken away from you by God until," Daniel 4, it says, "until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. Your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge heaven rules." When you acknowledge heaven rules. This is the only place in Scripture that this little phrase appears, heaven rules, and I love it. For 12 months, Daniel pleads with Nebuchadnezzar to adhere to the wisdom of this dream and to acknowledge that heaven rules, but Nebuchadnezzar does not. In fact, one night, Nebuchadnezzar is walking around the roof of his palace, overlooking the great city of Babylon, and he says to himself, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built as my royal residence?" He says, "By my mighty power and for the glory of my name." Oh no, you did it, Nebuchadnezzar. You did it again. You just forgot about God again. At that very moment, as the words are still coming off the edges of his lips, a voice from heaven calls down and says, "At this very moment, your royal authority has been taken from you," as in it didn't belong to you in the first place, as in it's been given to you in the first place. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from the people, and you'll live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox, and 7 times will pass until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. And that's exactly what happened. King Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind and became like an ox. Yeah, this is actually a thing. It's a rare mental illness called boanthropy. You can look it up, okay? Boanthropy. It causes its victims to assume the appearance and the posture and the habits of cattle. He actually thought he was a cow. Like, this is crazy, right? But that's what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar until 7 times passed by, and he finally acknowledged that the Most High was sovereign in all things and that heaven rules. Heaven rules. But after he finally acknowledged that heaven ruled, his sanity was restored to him and he was returned to his throne. And that brings us to our third reason to trust in God when your world is falling apart. You see, God is in control of your personal destiny. God is in control of your personal destiny. The Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. God is in control of your personal destiny. Do you remember how the nation of Israel even got caught up in this whole mess in the very first place? We read it right in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. The Lord delivered. See, ultimately, God is in control of who's in control. God is in control of who's in control. See, Nebuchadnezzar forgot his place. Nebuchadnezzar, he forgot how he got there. Nebuchadnezzar, he forgot that he ultimately wasn't in charge. He forgot that all authority and all glory and all power that he had been gifted to him by God himself. His life became a shadow of what it once was. His life became very small. And as your outline says, life becomes small when you think you're bigger than God. Life becomes small when you think you're bigger than God. Maybe you're here today and you're struggling with who God has put in authority over your life for this season. But God's in control of who's in control. And he's placed that person in authority over your life for a reason. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a direct report, but God has placed that person over your life. Today, you can honor God's authority in your life by honoring their authority in your life. Maybe you're here today and you've been given some measure of authority. Maybe you are a boss or a parent or a teacher. You lead a team. You have people that directly report to you. If that's you, use your authority wisely. Don't forget where it came from. Don't let it go to your head. You have been placed in that position for a reason. By God himself. It's not by accident. And he can take it away at any time. Because the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms and departments and divisions and classrooms and homes and teams on earth. And he gives them to anyone he wishes. God is in control of your personal destiny. Life can become small when you think you're bigger than God. Fast forward now 60 years. The year is now 539 BC. Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the king, but his grandson is the acting king of Babylon. His name is Belshazzar. Now, if you remember from your history textbooks, which I'm sure you all do, in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great was leading the Medes and the Persians, and they were going to attack the city of Babylon. So, on the very night that Cyrus the Great had surrounded the city of Babylon, King Belshazzar thought that the walls of Babylon could never be breached. So he decided to hold a party in honor of his own greatness that night. And something incredible happened at that party that King Belshazzar held. Now, do you remember the God collection and the King's collection that Nebuchadnezzar once started years ago? Well, when Nebuchadnezzar went into the temple in Jerusalem to grab the God the Jewish people worship to bring back to Babylon, they went to the temple to get their idol, but the Jewish God, there was no idol because God is not made of brick or stone or silver or gold. So instead, they grabbed these golden cups, these golden goblets, and brought them back to add to their collection. So on the night of this giant party, King Belshazzar, he says, bring out the gods collection and set up all the idols in a semicircle around the great Marduk as a way of symbolizing that all other nations bow down before us and our splendor. They bring out these golden goblets that they were robbed from the temple of God, and they begin to pass them out to the party guests. They begin to drink out of these golden goblets. It's like right out of a movie. Oh, no, you didn't, King Belshazzar. Are you challenging the God of the universe yet again? Have you forgotten everything that your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar went through? Have you forgot that heaven rules and that he is sovereign and the only reason that you're in your position is because God has placed you there? Right then, the plaster on the wall begins to fall off. It's as if a human hand begins to write on the wall, and it writes the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsons. The party stops. Everyone is terrified. They think, who's going to read this writing on the wall? And the queen remembers, Daniel. Daniel's in his 70s now. And they bring out Daniel to read this writing on the wall. And Daniel approaches the king and says, "Oh, Belshazzar, even though you knew what happened to your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, you still have not humbled yourself." Daniel 5:23 says, "Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all of your ways." So Daniel begins to read the writing on the wall, mene, mene, tekel parsons. He says it means God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and have been found wanting, O Belshazzar. Your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, little do they know, but days before, Cyrus the Great had gone upriver of the Euphrates River a couple miles, and he started to channel the river into a different direction. And so the river level of the Euphrates River started slowly decreasing. Now, the Euphrates River ran through a section of Babylon. So on the very night when this is all going down, it's like Cyrus the Great had timed this perfectly. Just as the sun sets, the water level dipped beneath the city walls. And the Medes and the Persians, they snuck under the city walls of Babylon. They killed King Belshazzar, and they took control of the city that very same night. So let me ask you, are you going to be a Daniel, a Nebuchadnezzar, or a Belshazzar? Are you going to be a Daniel? Are you going to be someone who places their full weight in God? You're going to acknowledge that heaven rules in all areas of your life, just like Daniel did. Or are you going to be a Nebuchadnezzar? Are you going to deny his sovereignty in your life until he humbles you and you have to cry out in desperation, just like Nebuchadnezzar? Or are you going to be like a Belshazzar, and you're going to ignore God's mighty hand at work in your life? You're going to think that your achievements are by your own strength and your own splendor and glory, only to realize it leads to your ultimate destruction, just like Belshazzar. I don't know about you, but I want to be a Daniel. I want to be a Daniel. I want to let heaven rule in my life. And believe it or not, but there are Daniels out there. There are Daniels out there in this culture, in this chaos. There are those of us that would rather take a stand for a God that's in control of all things rather than trust in ourselves or trust in man. We want to trust in God. See, there are Daniels out there. Will you be a Daniel? Will you take a stand for a God who's in control of all things? See, today we were seeking to answer the question, how does a Christ follower respond when it seems like our world is falling apart, when it feels like things are out of control? And we've learned that the Most High is sovereign in all things. We've learned that heaven rules, and we can trust God when our world is falling apart because God is in control of your personal circumstances, like he actually is. God is in control of your personal well-being, and God is in control of your personal destiny. And this brings us to our big idea for the day. We try to sum up the day's teaching with one simple idea, and this is it. Anything under God's control is never out of control. Anything under God's control is never out of control. It's never out of control. So let me ask you, church, are you here today and you feel out of control? I want to ask you, who's in control of your life? Right now as you sit here, who's in control of your life? Have you placed your life under the control of God? Because anything under God's control is never out of control. Today, you can leave this place confidently, trusting and being reassured that God is in control of your personal circumstances, that God's in control of your health, and that God's in control of who he's put in authority over your life. Today, church, will you surrender control to God?